He kōna ipurangi tēnei nā te reo irirangi o Aotearoa.
This is Mediawatch. I'm Colin Peacock. This week, these are tough times for magazines which specialise in publishing journalism. The likes of Metro in North and South have published important and illuminating stories under various owners for more than 40 years, but now both are currently out of print and trying to find a way back. A year ago, the editor of the award-winning New Zealand Geographic urged their subscribers to up their backing to keep it going. So 1 year on, how did that work out?
It gave our accountant the wobbles a little bit to when I suggested last year that I'm going to publish everything on the open internet. But it worked and he got it. And that's why we're doing the same thing again.
But before that, for a while, the market for EVs was booming, and now the incentives have been dialed down. There are also supply problems as well. But lately, there's been a steady supply of stories about the possible fire hazards of them spreading like wildfire on social media. But are the news media also giving people the wrong idea?
Warnings of a sharp increase in the cost of buying a car have prompted urgent legislation to be put through Parliament this week. It'll reduce charges on importers for failing to meet clean car standards with the aim of keeping prices down for consumers.
That was TVNZ's One News last Monday, and easing the cost of new and used imported vehicles was indeed the way that change was pitched in Transport Minister Chris Bishop's media release. But the means to that end was slashing the clean car standard by 80% by the end of this week.
The Transport Minister says the government's working to cut car prices as it passes legislation taking the knife to clean vehicle charges. Chris Bishop says without this, car prices would have risen massively next year.
We are fixing that, and if the members of the opposition want to go out and raise the price of ordinary cars at a time when many Kiwis are doing it tough, good luck.
Chris Bishop said that the change would mean $265 million in penalties would not now be charged, while political opponents and environmental groups voiced their fears that cheaper but higher emission cars from overseas would now be dumped here. On Morning Report, Chris Bishop insisted that the changes would only have a minimal effect on emissions and no regulatory impact statement was actually necessary. But after that, Morning Report's Ingrid Hipkiss asked Chris Bishop, was he sure the cost of cars would actually be eased by this at all?
Your media release says new and used vehicles could become more affordable, so you don't actually know?
No, and look, we put that in there and we've carefully caveated the words because it's complex, right? So what people sell cars at is, obviously it's a dynamic market, but also every vehicle importer will be in a different situation when it comes to penalties and credit. So it will really depend on the particular type of car and the situation they're in.
But on News Talk ZB's Drive show just the day before, host Ryan Bridge was pitching this as a promise of cheaper cars.
The government promising imported new and used vehicles going to get cheaper. They're cutting charges relating to the clean car standards by almost 80%.
And when the Minister, Chris Bishop, joined Ryan Bridge after that, he was much more precise about the savings to come.
What's a car, name a car, and how much will I save?
For example, a Toyota Hiace, maximum potential savings on that one of $1,500. Toyota Hilux, $1,000. Toyota RAV4, $260.
For a new
Kia Seltos,
for a new one,
$3,600. Yeah, for a new one. Yeah.
Okay.
Now, those figures for different makes and models were also in Chris Bishop's media release, where they were explicitly caveated as estimated savings. But when TVNZ's political editor Mikey Sherman ran through them on One News later on that day, they sounded like certain savings and were even displayed as such on the screen.
This Ford Ranger Raptor would see its charge reduced from $5,500 to around $1,200, and this Corolla would see charges reduced by more than $6,500.
Now, among the reasons that the Transport Minister gave on Morning Report last Tuesday for moving on this right now was this.
Bottom's fallen out of the EV market. There just simply hasn't been the demand there, and they also haven't been able to get the supply. So they've been hit with a bit of a perfect storm. It's like a double whammy.
But among things that might affect demand in recent days, worries about safety of the batteries.
Some residents at an Auckland retirement village want to put the brakes on a policy which would ban any more electric vehicles within its gates. Fairview Lifestyle Village in Albany says they're concerned about the risk an EV fire would pose to the busy community's residents and homes.
Lisa Owen on RNZ's Checkpoint last Monday. But why did those residents fear that EVs, e-bikes and even electric wheelchairs might go up in flames all of a sudden? EVs of many types can of course be parked and charged all over the place at the moment with no restrictions. Now that checkpoint story was sparked, excuse the pun, by a report in the Herald the day before, which said this.
One resident who did not want to be named told the Herald he was pulled into a meeting with other residents where management, quote, tried to scare us to death about the supposed fire risk electric vehicles posed.
And on checkpoint the next day, Retirement Village Residents Association Chief Executive Nigel Matthews told Lisa Owen this.
I think they are concerned, and there's been obviously attention in the media. As soon as there's an EV that blows up or catches fire, it's on the front page or it's on main 6 o'clock news. If it's a diesel or a petrol car, you won't hear about it.
And he's right, EVs on fire have certainly made the news a lot lately. Last month, 28 cars, including EVs, were set alight in Whangarei Hospital's outdoor car park. But in spite of online speculation, it was dry grass on a hot exhaust that started the blaze that spread to other vehicles and not an overheated EV. And before that, there was the awful tragedy on Tamaki Drive in Auckland, when the driver of an electric bus died after it was engulfed in flames following a collision with a petrol-powered car. And again, that prompted keyboard warriors to conclude that EV batteries in the buses were a hazard. Now, many of those also cited an earlier crash of a bus into an Auckland railway station building where nobody was hurt, but smoke was seen emerging from the top of the bus, which is where some of the batteries in an electric bus are stored. Alarmed by what he called misinformation about the Tamaki Drive crash and bizarre anti-EV propaganda, Auckland City Councillor Richard Hills then took to social media himself to say that the fire started from the petrol vehicle that hit that bus on Tamaki Drive, according to Fire and Emergency New Zealand, and the electric bus's batteries were actually undamaged, as it turned out. Electric vehicles are far less likely to catch fire than petrol-driven vehicles, he said, though both are unlikely, he also reminded his social media followers. And he said so again the next day on News Talk ZB's Drive Show.
Then all I saw everywhere was, told ya, EV buses, told ya, EV batteries, and it was all incorrect.
But the Drive host Heather Duplessis-Allen seemed more concerned about the length of time that Tamaki Drive was closed, reckoning that the bus being electric was the cause of that.
But once they got on the bus, Richard, what they saw was battery packs hanging through the roof. And so they were worried about that. Which vehicles put battery packs in the roof? Electric vehicles, right? So it's because it was an electric vehicle with batteries in the roof that were hanging down, they then had to somehow isolate those batteries. So it actually was the fact that it was an electric vehicle that was a problem. But secondly, they saw gas leaking and they worried that it was the lithium batteries that were starting to disintegrate. Actually, it was an aircon problem, but again, they were treating it differently because it was an electric vehicle. Am I wrong?
Well, interesting details there, which, interestingly, were not in any news story published by News Talk ZB or its stablemates at the Herald at the time. And there's been no report from Fire and Emergency New Zealand about that yet, who didn't respond to our inquiries about that this week, by the way. But in the meantime, Heather Duplessis-Allen told Councillor Richard Hills,
it is a told you so, because this cannot happen again, Richard. If we have an electric vehicle that has a crash on Tamaki Drive, an electric bus that has a crash on Tamaki Drive, you cannot shut a road for 24 hours.
And after that, she had the last word like this.
Thank you. I appreciate your time. Richard Hills, Auckland Councillor. So if you thought it was because it was an electric vehicle, it was. We did some extensive looking into it for you. It was because it was an electric vehicle in the end.
Well, it is true that fires involving electric vehicles, whether they're the cause of them or not, can be harder to suppress and take longer to make safe. Lisa Owen made the same point with that story about the Fairview Village this week, right at the start. And the online version of that story linked to another RNZ one, all about that same issue, from 2019. But whether that meant that Tamaki Drive had to be closed for that long last month after that horrible, fatal accident, for that reason, is not known. Now, hosting the morning streaming show Herald Now at that time, News Talk ZB's Ryan Bridge explained what happened this way.
Fire and Emergency say this week's fatal Auckland electric bus blaze began in a petrol car and spread to the bus. The company which makes the bus's batteries says they were undamaged in the fire, though Tamaki Drive was kept closed out of an abundance of caution.
And after that, Ryan Bridge interviewed AUT Professor of Electronic Engineering Adnan Al-Anbuki, who explained how heat can excite a lithium battery, causing ignition or even explosion in extreme circumstances, which is useful information, but it still wasn't clear how likely that really is to happen on the road or in a garage. And 10 days after the Tamaki Drive crash, another electric bus operated by Auckland Transport caught fire when it struck an overpass on the city's northern busway. Now, there were no passengers in this bus and the driver got out safely that time, but dramatic images of the flames in the underpass were widely viewed on social media, sparking yet another round of speculation about the danger of electric buses catching fire. Now, that prompted an explainer from Stuff the next day with the no-nonsense headline,
"No, electric buses aren't catching fire because of their batteries."
That article quoted Australian fire safety expert Emma Sutcliffe, who researches EV battery fires for Australia's Department of Defence. She said they found evidence of just 8 such fires in Australia in 3 years to 2024, and that's a time when there were more than 180,000 EVs in use, she said. And she added,
"While Auckland has had these 3 events in a row, they're unconnected. It's just unfortunate that they've happened in a bit of a cluster."
You should be far more concerned about the cheap lithium-ion batteries in your house than the ones powering your bus to work, Emma Sutcliffe added. And not for nothing did Fire and Emergency New Zealand launch a campaign about that just last month here, with slogans like this.
"Warning, using an incorrect battery in your e-bike can cause violent fire in seconds."
But reporting about this issue can also cause unnecessary alarm. Last year, for example, RNZ reported a Wellington man's claim that his neighbour's Tesla burst into flames in the garage next door. Eventually, Fire and Emergency New Zealand ruled out electric vehicles or lithium-ion batteries as the cause of the fire, and RNZ updated the story. But sometimes it seems the media are just too willing to jump to conclusions. Early this year, for example, a fire destroyed a boarding house in a Sydney suburb, and the Sydney Morning Herald reported it this way.
Fire and Rescue Superintendent Adam Dewberry said it was not yet clear if the blaze, which started on the ground floor, began as an electrical fire. He said investigations were focusing on lithium-ion e-bike batteries around the area, which had contributed to the fire's rapid spread and intensity, causing numerous minor explosions.
And on the same day, Channel 7's TV News report was even more inflammatory.
While it's unclear how this fire started, there were multiple e-bikes around. Firefighters say they're now responding to at least one fire involving lithium-ion batteries each day.
Jet-like fire coming out of these battery packs, explosions. There are batteries that have shattered and pushed themselves all over the rear yard.
And if you listen carefully to what one of those residents told the 7 News reporter in that same report...
What happened? Woke up and it's on fire. I had a candle going, maybe it was the candle.
The distressed resident there said, "I had a candle going, maybe it was the candle." Now, when a firefighter at the scene says that batteries are a hazard in a fire like that and others he's seen, well, you believe it, but he wasn't saying that they caused that fire. The media were. Well, here, one person alarmed about the impression news media might be giving people about the risks of EVs and the dramatic-sounding prospect of thermal runaway in big batteries is Dr. Troy Bailsden. He's the current co-president of the New Zealand Association of Scientists. So I asked him if the risk is clearly real, yet in normal circumstances remote, how should the media approach stories about alarming incidents like the ones we've seen in Auckland recently?
So we know there's a risk of EV myths and misinformation spread, and the recent story about EV fires show how rapidly these can spread, even in the mainstream media. The most interesting thing about these stories is that there were stories about EV fires that contained no EV fire. What could they have done differently? They could have actually said that the risk of EVs catching on fire is about 60 times less than an equivalent petrol or diesel vehicle, or adjusted for the mileage, it's maybe 20 times less.
Well, the news media like to think that they are bulwarks against misinformation, that they're a more reliable source. So I think they would hate it if you say they kind of supported a false supposition that EVs were somehow risky or a greater risk of fire. But if we take that Fairview Village story, for example, clearly relevant context that they were thinking about this because of those 2 bus incidents that happened. So the story mentions them. I mean, news editors would say, well, this is all relevant context, so it has to be in the story, really.
So instead of saying that there's a low risk, saying that the risk is actually lowered by having an EV relative to conventional combustion vehicles is a pretty logical way to do it. There's other information that you could think about, such as, well, anything that can move you hundreds of kilometers and 2 tons of metal is going to have a lot of energy stored in it. So it can create a fire. An EV actually uses about 1/3 of the energy to transport you that distance because it doesn't waste 2/3 of the energy as heat.
When you say, for example, about that particular story about the Fairview community, RNZ the Checkpoint program covered this. They had, for example, right up top at the start of the story that was broadcast, EV fires are rare, but they can be harder to put out. So a little bit of context there. So two things that are true. Online, that line again was right up there in the top of the text version of the story with a link to a story from 2019. To your mind, is that insufficient, as they call it these days, pre-bunking, like introducing people to the relevant context? That wasn't enough for you?
Probably not. I still don't think that's the most relevant thing, which is actually it's a risk reduction. The other issues, though, is are we ready to deal with EV fires? That's actually a more important issue, just making sure that people know sprinklers and slightly different methods of firefighting are really important, and it's important where there are a lot of EVs, or particularly really big batteries, like the bus batteries, bigger than car batteries, that those firefighting methods are known and ready to respond.
So we take that incident of the fatal fire on Tamaki Drive. Tamaki Drive, very busy road, was closed for a full day. We heard on News Talk ZB, for example, the host Heather Duplessis-Allen saying, well, because it was an electric bus, that road was closed for a day. So again, would you say that's fair enough to report that as true, or does that also, in your mind, run that risk of amplifying the risk or the hazards of EVs on the road?
I think it's fair, but for me, it also points out that actually we're not great at working through risk. The information to support journalists reporting these risks in New Zealand isn't great. You have to go to Australia for a good story in an organization like The Conversation to get a decent quality report on the fire risks associated with EVs relative to combustion vehicles. And so there are good debunking articles. There's one in the Consumer magazine, for example, in New Zealand, which is a great trusted source. But it's a matter of news organization responding to headlines and trying to come up with an angle on a story, being able to make sure that the journalist or the editors involved can find those. Because we're talking about something that actually hasn't happened. There's been no EV fire that's been caused by an EV in New Zealand as yet. In addition to the methods of fighting EV fires, there is one substantial way to reduce the risk of EV fires, and that's to charge substantially under 100%. So the usual advice to charge your battery to 80% apparently substantially reduces the amount of fire that you're at risk of if an EV does catch on fire during charging.
So we know that this is not a zero-risk technology, right? And when fires occur, whether EV batteries are the cause or not, they can become a fire hazard.
Yeah, I think that's a key point. And, everybody's home has a number of risks. The risks associated with a barbecue blowing up. I mean, that's something where I've seen a mushroom cloud over a house myself, and that's not a good thing. Storing that, in a garage with a car and other things that can catch on fire is a problem. So maybe take it from a scientist who's run large laboratories with a lot of dangerous things in them. Don't put the dangerous things that can catch on fire together.
Skeptics might be listening to this. Well, Troy Baisden, okay, so he's an environmental scientist. He's taught about carbon and emissions and probably pro-zero emission technologies. You could be perhaps have a bias which persuades you that you would want to minimise the risk of these new technologies that reduce emissions, and you'd be less inclined to amplify any risks associated with them because you're keen to see their uptake.
Well, I think I am keen to see the uptake of electric cars, much like Chris Bishop. I've had one for a number of years, particularly thinking about those retirement village residents and the decisions that were going on there. I feel like they were really let down by our information ecosystem.
And if people are saying, well, this is still a relatively new technology, EVs have been around for a while, but still relatively new products coming out all the time. If there's a risk, we may not fully understand it. Is it possible that people who are pro the technology might be giving the media the message that there's almost no risk when perhaps it might be a little greater? We'll find that out in later years.
Well, I suppose that's possible, but here we're talking about more than an order of magnitude less risk, so at least 20 times less risk associated with EVs than conventional cars. So that's pretty significant. Engine. It's difficult to say that I'd be causing more bias than that.
So the next time this happens, social media footage of an AT Auckland bus on fire again. This will be the third incident in some recent weeks. You would say wrong for the media to link these three things when in no case was the battery a cause?
Yeah, I really don't want to be a regular performer on the radio saying that we're here talking about EV fires again and there's still been no EV fire.
That was Troy Baisden, a current co-president of the New Zealand Association of Scientists. Magazine publishing is a pretty tough game in New Zealand right now. There are a lot of titles to choose from, and with money tight for many households, they're a nice to have for many people. And last week on the professional social network LinkedIn, the publisher of the food magazine Dish, Sarah Tuck, confessed to having a wee bit of a cry. But she said they were tears of joy, in fact, what she called jubilant pride in her publication and her team, because sales for the annual Christmas edition of Dish were up 41% on last year already. If anyone had any doubt people are still buying magazines, she said, I can tell you they're most definitely buying Dish. Bring on 2026. Well, that's good to hear, and Christmas can be a crucial boost for magazines as people buy more to read on holiday and also give the gift of subscriptions to others. It's a pretty easy, no-fuss purchase for people who hate shopping, to be honest. But magazines that are dedicated to in-depth journalism aren't quite as bullish about 2026 and beyond. The Weekly New Zealand Listener, for example, is still going strong in print for subscribers and on newsstands, but the Australian outfit that owns its publisher, Media, has been trying to sell it for months, with no success yet. And the current owners of Metro and North and South have both suspended printing after almost 40 years. They both say they're still looking at ways of getting back into print, though in Metro's case, that'll be tough without any full-time staff or even an editor still on the payroll. Now, a year ago, the publisher of New Zealand Geographic, James Frankham, seemed not at all sure that would be in print either by now, when he was on Mediawatch back then.
The walls are closing in on digital journalism. We're getting less and less traffic from search and social, so that notion that we can transition to a digital future is simply not true. The print product still makes more money than the digital product for us, and costs are going up enormously for the print product. Our postal rates tripled in the last 10 years. Our print price has gone up 50% in the last 3 or 4 years. So the walls are starting to close in.
And to sheet home that jeopardy to the customers and clients and subscribers and supporters of the magazine, James Frankham took the bold step of opening up the books to reveal just how fine the financial margins are for New Zealand Geographic and how they've spent their subscribers' money. Well, 1 year on, New Zealand Geographic is still appearing every 2 months in print, and it's publishing lots of stuff as well on its substantial and expanding digital platform. And now James Frankham has opened up the books again, showing that the bold move last year paid off, with a late season subscription surge and another one at Christmas time. So, is it all rosy then for 2026 and beyond, or are those walls he warned about still closing in?
Oh, yeah, we couldn't have continued really without that level of certainty that we were going to be staked by our subscribers. So we had an unprecedented, I think it was a 36% growth in subscription income from 1 year to the next, which just doesn't happen in media, and which allowed us to keep in the journalism business, essentially.
Yeah, you said a year ago people used to ask me cheerfully, how's it going at NZ Geo? Recently, my mates tended to wince as they asked me like they're inquiring about the health of a grandmother. Granny has pulled through and is in better shape. But you are now saying we've got 4,000 subscriptions coming up for renewal in the next 2 months. Renew them and we survive to go another year, pass them in, and we're stuffed. I mean, that's again a fairly bleak message that you're kind of repeating.
Bleak? I don't know. I'm optimistic about our future. Basically, half of all of our income comes directly from readers wanting us to produce a high-quality product, and it creates a straight line between our revenue and what we want to do. I know it gave our accountant the wobbles a little bit when I suggested last year that I'm going to publish everything on the open internet. But it worked and he got it. And that's why we're doing the same thing again, because it's part of being a trusted source is that people understand where your income comes from and what you spend it on and the degree to which you profit from that and what gets ploughed back in.
When you did this last year for the first time, I think I recall you using that kind of business phrase about opening the kimono. Were you?
That was actually a third party.
Okay.
But yes, correct.
And then in the current update on how it's gone in that past year, you said that people who take a look will see in the past year we've tightened the corset on costs. So you open the kimono, people see that corset. Sort of extending the metaphor. But you also say the total revenue down from 1.7 million to less than 1.5. But that's not the end of the world. But, I mean, if it's gone down, that is a problem for you, isn't it?
Well, yes and no. This was exactly the problem that we anticipated. I knew that fiscal cliff, if you like, was coming for us, and wanted to get in front of that and wanted to replace that lost revenue, which largely came from content production, film and television and VR production work that we were doing that was coming to an end, and replace that with reader revenue for subscriptions that would power our journalism product. We didn't fix the total revenue, but I knew we wouldn't, and that's why we also had to reduce costs as well. We've come out with basically a bottom line net profit to within $2,000 of what we did the previous year, despite that massive drop in revenue. But we've been able to weather the storm because of reader subscriptions.
In terms of the business of being a magazine in print, does it worry you, North and South have kind of gone out of print, say they want to come back into print, are clearly finding that difficult. Metro, why is it so hard for magazines that publish, journalism now to stay in print in the old-fashioned way?
One of the great challenges is that the new-fashioned way, in inverted commas, of going digital, it hasn't been the pot of gold that everybody hoped it would be. Returns for digital subscriptions are very, very thin. The costs of running a digital enterprise remain fairly high. The house always wins in terms of promotion, i.e. Facebook and Google will take the great proportion of all digital advertising. It is harder than ever to get somebody to click off a platform belonging to a tech giant to arrive at your site, and the tech giants have been what they call deprecating those links, which mean that they want to keep people on their platforms for as long as possible. We've seen a 20% decrease year on year in traffic from search. So if you go to Google and type in, seabirds affected by light pollution, 3 or 4 years ago, you would have been directed to our site with an organic link. Today, you get presented with an AI answer that occupies the top third of the page. The rest are sponsored links. There might be 1 or 2 organic links at the bottom, or else you're on page 2. And tell me the last time anybody clicked on page 2 of Google. I would not be surprised if 5 years from now we had a print magazine and an AI application, and the website was basically furniture.
And I know that you're working on a project which might use emerging technologies and AI, etc., to help surface stuff like this, such that you're not at the mercy of other platforms. And we'll talk about that when the time comes. But you have submitted on this, and you do consider this sort of advocacy. You also, I think, submitted to the complaint to the Commerce Commission about New Zealand Post. Because it's much more expensive to send paper publications around the country now than it used to be.
We've made submissions to the Commerce Commission around New Zealand Post's behaviour in terms of zonal pricing and driving profitability into their courier company at the cost of publication mail. We were knocked back on that, so clearly the Commerce Commission did not agree. Likewise, we made submissions on the Fair Digital News Bargaining Bill. That has not gone ahead, and we need to figure out another way or put another approach in front of government to consider. But all essentially we are interested in is a level playing field in New Zealand for media, and that includes those other organisations that are also, competing for the attention of New Zealanders, being Google, Facebook, OpenAI and others, and asking government to ensure that they meet those same standards in terms of regulation, in terms of taxation, in terms of how they conduct themselves in this market.
And in appealing to your supporters to keep supporting you and renew those subscriptions and so on, you were pondering in your most recent update, what difference New Zealand Geographic actually makes, beyond just the publishing of journalism.
Yeah, the other work that we're doing is, scientific research. We're involved in booting up a program called Citizens of the Sea that allowed us to understand about 1.5 million square kilometres of our ocean estate beyond the shore. We've worked on our environmental education program, that's in association with Blake Truss, which uses VR to reach about 40,000 school students every year. There's a lot of work that is going on above and beyond the written journalism work that is important to the overall mission of New Zealand Geographic.
Do any of your supporters kind of say, well, yeah, that's all very nice, but if times are tough and it's a struggle to do the journalism, why don't you just put all your efforts into that?
Yeah, we do put most of our effort into that. But at the same time, we have external funding to do some of those other projects. But, largely it's subscriptions that power our journalism, and long may it be so, really.
And just finally, James, one of the things you told me last year, but it's clearly not funny, but can be seen in one of two ways. One of the most stolen magazines in New Zealand. Do you know if that's still the case? And if so, do you just see that as well? Evidence of the high demand for what you produce, that people are prepared to risk prosecution by nicking it?
Yes, I made the joke. But also it's about the fact that a general interest magazine like this gets read by every member of their household. And so there might be one sitting on the coffee table and 5 members of the household read it, or granny passes it on to the grandkids after she's finished.
Are you going to dig deeper into this with your reader surveys? How did you come across our content? And,
yeah, we do.
If someone says, I stole it.
We do. We have what's called primary readers, which are the people that buy the magazine and pay money for it, secondary and tertiary readers, and being in the household or outside of the household. So we know who they are. And we're interested in all readers and how they access our content, including the people who are online or drop in from social media, and that's what our survey is about.
So if you're saying, if you stole the magazine, did you steal it from A, a waiting room, B, neighbour's mailbox, C, colleagues at work? You don't ask that, do
something
you?
like that. No, I don't ask that. Rather not know, to be honest.
That was James Frankham, the publisher of New Zealand Geographic, which, as you heard there, is much more than just a magazine these days. It's also got a fully multimedia digital platform, developing products in VR and AI, along with apps and content, books and educational resources, and also conducting environmental advocacy partnerships. And you can read all about the New Zealand Geographic radical financial transparency that James told us about there at the website nzgeo.com, where you can also sign up for its regular updates and newsletters, or even subscribe to help boost its work and its journalism. Last weekend here on Mediawatch, we took a long look at the BBC under huge pressure now from media and political rivals at home, and from President Trump in the White House, now threatening to sue the BBC for up to $5 billion. And we looked at developments in that last Wednesday on Midweek Mediawatch, our weekly catch-up with Emile Donovan on nights on RNZ National, where we also looked at how Trump shrugged off the 2018 slaughter of the Saudi Washington Post reporter Jamal Khashoggi when Trump welcomed Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman to the White House.
A lot of people didn't like that gentleman that you're talking about. Whether you like him or didn't like him, things happen, but he knew nothing about it.
We also talked about TVNZ's veteran reporter Simon Mild-Mannered Mersep and his masterful coverage from the monster Metallica concert in Auckland, which saw Simon artfully diffusing munted punters' F-bombs live on One News.
Here's our resident rocker, Simon Mersep.
Very well, very friendly. I will get the language. Very friendly, but also the other.
And while the All Blacks and the All Whites both came up short in the Northern Hemisphere this past week, the footballers of Scotland and Ireland showed how to electrify the commentators.
There's the goal! That is unbelievable. He scored a hat-trick. And right at the death, Ireland have done it.
Though Emile Donovan himself also got something of a slapdown and another F-bomb from his favourite Irish podcast for sharing his own feelings about their football coverage.
Perhaps this attitude goes some way to explaining the limitations of Ireland's own national team and indeed vindicates Rice's decision. Jesus. F*** off, Emile. You had me up until that last paragraph.
All that and a startling local story about tavern tensions in the Tararua district, all in this week's Midweek Media Watch. If you missed it, it's available in our podcast feed. That's it for this weekend, though. Thanks for listening. If you have any thoughts for us or ideas for us to follow up, do get in touch. Email us, mediawatch@rnz.co.nz. You'll also find us at MediawatchNZ on X, and you can even write us an old-fashioned letter and send it to Mediawatch, P.O. Box 123, Wellington. Catch you again on Wednesday for Midweek Media Watch. In the meantime, follow Media Watch and listen on any podcast app to make sure you never miss an episode.